Hi, welcome again to another version of Meet Your Neighbor right here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. We're certainly glad that you've joined us today, and I know you're going to enjoy this program today. My guest today is Mr. Jerry Hubbell, who's been living on the lake for quite a while. We'll get into all that with Jerry in a few minutes, but you have some really interesting stories to go to, and we're going to find out a lot about things like Astro Photography and things to me that's way over my head, but we'll find out more about that. Jerry, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Norm. I appreciate the invite to come talk to people about what I do.
You have one of the most unique careers that I've heard about in a long time. I mean, so you've touched on so many areas that are so highly technical. But it all didn't start out as reading physics books at age 3, did it?
No, but I tell you what, I grew up, I was born in 1960, so I was a space program kid. I grew up watching the space program, and really it didn't hit home to me until I was like 8 years old, right at when the Apollo program was getting rolled in, and right before the moon landings. So that was my first hook into science and technology, was the Apollo program.
Now, you tell me you were raised as a military kid, though, so you lived all over the United States.
Right.
Was your father involved in aviation or those kind of things?
No, my dad was in the Army for most of his military career. He started out in the Navy right during World War II, but he joined the Army and was interested in generators. But he does have kind of a hook into space, because he worked on the generation systems, the backup generators and things for the missile system. So we were at in El Paso at Fort Bliss. I remember living there a couple of times, and we were at Fort Meade. We were at Fort Ord, California. So all these places where they had missile systems is what my dad worked on, the power systems for those systems.
I can imagine living at Fort Bliss.
This was in I went to first grade at Fort Bliss, 1966, so that's where I was at.
Wow, the Texas border was a whole lot different then than it is
now. Oh yeah, I remember my dad taking me across the border to Juarez to get my hair cut. I just have that remembrance in my head.
You get it for a quarter over there.
Yeah, probably so. I imagine it was pretty cheap.
So moving around in military family, did you come from a large family?
Well, I've got one brother and 2 sisters, so it's a mid-sized family, I guess you'd call it. My mom's from West Virginia. My dad was born in Oklahoma, but his family settled out west. And I don't really know how he met my mom per se, but...
And you end up at Spotsylvania.
Yep, exactly. In 1973, ended up in Spotsylvania, and then my parents bought a house at the courthouse, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and I went to Spotsylvania High School and graduated in '78.
And then right into your career then?
Well, after graduation, during high school, I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and I did the standard thing. I wrote my congressman and tried to, and I actually obtained a nomination from my congressman, but I didn't get appointed. So I was, there's 10 congressmen allowed to appoint 10 people, and I was number 11. And I was waiting for somebody to drop out, but that never occurred. So during my whole high school career, I was always interested in math and science, so I knew I was going to be either a pilot or an engineer of some kind. And not until really I got into electrical engineering right out, and I went to the local Germanic Community College here and got my associate's degree in electrical engineering. And then at that point, when I got into that, I started looking at what I could do locally. And they were building a nuclear station here at North Anna. They were in startup mode, and so I got interested in nuclear. And as a bizarre thing, if you remember the movie China Syndrome,
yes. I
went and saw that, and that really turned me on to nuclear. I disregarded the whole accident scenario because I figured it was, pretty far-fetched. But because I understood technology at that point, at some point, and so I was really excited about learning how nuclear plants worked, and so I just dove into that.
And knowing how it works, that's what you did for Dominion Power?
That's right, Dominion. At the beginning it was called VEPCO, if people recall that. Yeah, in 1980 I started working at the nuclear plant.
And doing?
I was an instrumentation controls technician.
Big title?
We took care of, if you look in the control room, all the readouts, all the dials and gauges and switches and knobs and things, those are all the systems that feed that information I took care of, basically.
Wow, that's a
And
lot.
it was all, and it was not modern day computer stuff. It was all analog computer stuff.
And those were things that you really couldn't take a course in school, was it?
No, well, my degree in electrical engineering, my associate's degree, prepared me to with teaching me all about the components, all the chips and circuitry that's involved with the analog and some digital computing at that point. But that prepared me to learn the systems in the plant based on the plant and vendor training I got. I got a lot of training through the Westinghouse. It was a Westinghouse plant. So they provided most of the primary systems for the nuclear reactor, and I got all the training, all the instrumentation training.
During all those years in the nuclear plant, you were raising a family too?
Well, I started my career, and then after 2 years I moved to South Carolina to be we called them rent-a-techs, basically a contract technician.
Right.
And I boosted my salary. I probably tripled my salary by doing that.
Right.
But I went down to South Carolina to a nuclear plant, VC Summer, which is near Columbia. And that's where I met my wife. Her family had just moved down there. Her dad had just retired, and they moved to South Carolina. So that's where I met my wife, and that was in 1982.
82, and the family began shortly thereafter.
That's right, about a year after, yep.
He only has a very small family one.
Yeah, I've worked on it over the years. I don't do anything small or light, or I don't know if I'm extreme, but I have 8 kids basically.
And they range from age 11 up until
34
into the 30s.
This year. They'll be 34 this year, my son.
Talk about the Waltons. This is a great story. Well, during all of that time, did you have an epiphany, or had you always had kind of an amateur or a curiosity about astronomy?
Well, my astronomy started, again, I was an Apollo kid, so I was turned on to the space program.
Right.
And so that really got my interest in astronomy going. It was interesting because when my dad was in Vietnam in 1969, we lived in Laurel, Maryland, near Fort Meade. And we lived in an apartment complex, and there was a fellow there in the apartment complex that worked at Goddard Space Flight Center. And I got to know him. And he was working on astronomy stuff. Basically, he was building a control system for a telescope, believe it or not. And that's always stuck in my head. And I remember seeing the work he was doing with these, back then, these digital circuits were really basic stuff, discrete. Really took a large amount of circuitry to do a basic thing like a clock counter. You see the wristwatch clocks or any kind of clock you have, it's real basic. It took several, boards to do that kind of function back then.
So was your curiosity more in the technology end of it, or as opposed to the scientific look out into space stuff?
I think it started out with the technology, and it goes back and forth. I'm interested in the technology, but I'm not just interested in tools just for the sake of tools, That's the way a lot of people are today. They like computers because of computers. They don't like it because of what they do for you. I've always was interested also in what can computers do for you, or what could this stuff do for you, what could technology do for you. And in that regard, I was interested in astronomy and also aviation. I'm also a pilot, so.
That's right, you were in the Civil Guard, right?
I was in the Virginia Defense Force, and we used to have a aviation battalion, and I flew for them for about 10 years.
So 2 of your dreams came true from high school.
And it was a different avenue to get there, because I thought that maybe if I could be a fighter pilot, at some point when I was a kid. But it turns out I was able to get take college and skills and knowledge, and get a nice job where I could afford to buy things and afford to learn how to fly.
Right.
And fly for myself instead of having. So there's 2 avenues. You can either let the government pay for your career like that and get a nice, high-tech career going through the government work, right, or through the military. Or you can pay for it yourself by getting another job and then paying for yourself.
Is that still part of your passion, flying?
Yes. Oh, yes. I haven't done it as much recently, but I go back and forth. I've got like 3 or 4 different hobbies that I do that I kind of cycle through.
Yeah.
Now, I've turned 2 of my hobbies into jobs, computers and astronomy. So I don't think I'll be flying for a job, although I thought at one time that when I retire that I would be a flight instructor part-time also. So I may still pursue that.
So are you retired from the power?
I took an early retirement from the power company so that I could pursue this. This opportunity came about. The company I work for is in Springdale, Arkansas. It's called
Well, I was looking at the website for Scientific Explorer, or Explore Scientific.
Right.
Explore Scientific, I'll get the name right. And you they build telescopes, they build...
Yeah, it started out as an optical company. Scott Roberts, who's the founder, was the vice president of the Meade Telescopes, which is a pretty big telescope company. And about 10 years ago, he decided he wanted to start his own company. And so he formed Explore Scientific. And he partnered with another company in China. They were an OEM provider for telescope optics. So he started this telescope company 10 years ago, and it's primarily an optics company, and he's focused on the refractor telescope type, which is a lens telescope with lenses in them. Everybody's familiar with that type of, like the spyglass that pirates used to use. That's much bigger.
As opposed to the other kind is a reflector.
It's a reflector, right, exactly, which is a big mirror at the base of the telescope. And also eyepieces. He wanted to be the highest quality eyepieces for a value price, basically. There's companies in the United States, there's 3 or 4 companies that make excellent eyepieces that are top of the line, but they're at a certain price point. And he wanted not to undercut them, but he wanted to be able to bring more value and have more people buy eyepieces that were high quality. So that's basically what he's done for the industry over the last 10 years.
But that's, now going to work with them though, that's long after you built your first telescope yourself though, right?
Well, I never physically built any telescopes.
Oh, okay.
I grew up during that period where people were doing that back in the 70s. It was a big time. But I always bought my telescopes, but I couldn't afford anything until I started my career. So my first big telescope really wasn't until 1986 when I was working. I bought a nice 10-inch Meade reflector telescope. It's called a Cassegrain.
And that was just for stargazing?
Yep, and I dabbled a little bit with photography then, but it was so cumbersome and so, especially for deep sky, you have to get accurate tracking for long periods of time, and it's really costs a lot of money to do that back then, especially.
Sure.
But I was mainly a visual lunar guy. I love looking at the moon. I think that's part of my roots in the Apollo program and stuff.
Right.
I fell in love with the way the moon looks, with the craters and the rills and all the different topographical features.
And you've seen it up close without getting there, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you've seen some of the images.
We're going to show you some of those images. So let me get into that. Astro Photography, that's a category all on its own. So as you said, you don't do anything small.
Right, no, and that's probably one of the most difficult types of photography to do. There's two basic sides to astrophotography. One is lunar planetary, which basically is bright objects. Okay, the planets and the moon, and even solar too. Solar is is considered part of the lunar planetary because of the methods that you use to image those objects. And then there's deep sky objects, which are really very long exposure images. Like people today are doing, 8 hours of exposure. And there's techniques to do that. It's not all at one shot, of course,
Sure.
because the night doesn't last for 8 hours most of the time, and you got other things going on.
Well, and I've also understood infrared photography is part of that.
There's a specialty where you have filters, and cameras are sensitive to infrared. So there's filter systems that you use along with the cameras to do different imaging to bring out different features in the planets and features and deep sky objects also. There's narrowband filters that take very long exposures, and to bring out different chemical elements in the nebula, for example, oxygen and silicon and other things. You can detect that stuff out in space. Amateurs can do that kind of work.
Wow, so amateurs can take good pictures and...
Right, and detect the element. And also, one of the things we're doing is a spectroscopy where you can actually look at a star and get its spectra. A very dim star, something that you'd never be able to see with your naked eye. and do spectra on it and determine what type of star it is and what kind of chemical elements are in the star.
And all that takes is just a little bit of research and a want to.
Yep, exactly. And you just have to have a desire to, and there's a lot to study.
But there's quite a few people in our area who are excited about this and are amateur astrologers or astronomers.
Astronomers, right. Yep, there's quite a few people in the area. We've got a local astronomy club, and it's based in Fredericksburg. It covers 4 or 5 counties: King George, Spotsylvania, Orange counties, and Fredericksburg, where we meet every month. It's called the Rappahannock Astronomy Club. I'm a past president of that club. But we probably have, typically every year, we get 30 paid members. And it's interesting because we're kind of a high-tech group compared to some clubs, because a lot of the people, I would say at least half the people that are a member of our club actually work at Dahlgren Naval Surface Weapons Laboratory, or they're retired from there. So we got a couple of PhDs and some people, and we got 2 credentialed astronomers. One's a radio astronomer, one's a regular, I guess you'd call it a visible light or light astronomer. They're professionally trained.
So where do you your telescope now? You have it in your backyard, or how do you?
Well, I started out with my system back about 8 years ago, designing all the equipment and the optics and the cameras and the electronics and the computers that all go along with it. And I used to set it up as a portable system. So every night I'd go out and I'd bring all my equipment out to wherever I was going to. I was going to the park behind near where I live, and then I was going to my front yard in the driveway. But it'd take me almost an hour to set up all the equipment and get it, and then do a calibration on the cameras. And then I'd image for about 4 or 5 hours, and then it'd take an hour to tear it all down and put it back away in its case and stuff. So that's how I started out about 8 years ago. And after about 4 years of that, 3 or 4 years of that, I probably set it up and took it down about 200 times. So I really got good at it, and I understood exactly where my equipment, I could do it in the dark. I could do it in the complete blackness, with a little bit of light. But I could, everything's choreographed when you get to that level. But at that point, I felt like, well, I know quite a bit now. I spent about 3 years studying this stuff. Really hard, probably almost like another full-time job. And lo and behold, came an opportunity for me to write a book. So, and that was kind of interesting. I don't know if people are familiar with Springer Books. They're a big science book company. They do medical and physics and other kind of science books. They're a pretty big company worldwide. And so I was approached, and actually, I started working on some lesson plans for our club members to do astrophotography. And then a couple of members said, hey, this stuff's getting pretty big. I had up to almost 100 pages of stuff that I'd written. And it was getting to be where it's almost like, well, maybe I could turn this into a book. People suggested that to me. I said, well, maybe I can. So one day I saw on Sky and Telescope an ad for book authors wanting to contact Springer. They didn't say they were Springer, but that's who they were. And so I emailed this guy and said, hey, I've been working on these lesson plans that might be able to turn into a book. And they said, oh, we're interested. So out of nowhere, I'd never considered writing a book. And then
but your book is not a high-end technical journal as much as it is for amateur astronomers.
Well, it is a technical book, okay?
Of course, because
and amateurs are at a certain level. They're pretty much they're operating professional level equipment at this point.
So a guy like me that's never done this before, if I bought your book and I wanted to read it, I probably wouldn't know what I was reading.
You'd have to have a certain base level of knowledge. If you get your telescope, let's say you start out and you're interested in telescopes, and you buy one and you start reading on the web, you start getting a couple books. You get familiar with the equipment over like a year or two, then you can start reading my book and see. And because I explain stuff at a certain level, but you can't make the book huge, so you have to assume a certain level of knowledge. Terminology. Although I have a glossary, I have a nice index and everything. But again, You could read my book if you're technically oriented. Now, if you've got a career in the technical area, like a technician for a computer technician, or if you want to get into astronomy, you could jump right into my book, I think, and understand it.
Well, it's been
you should
pretty
be able
well.
to do it. You've been into cameras and stuff, so
Yeah.
you know you're technically oriented
Well,
at some
I don't
level.
know about that. I read a manual. It's like, especially mathematics, it's like reading a Chinese Bible.
There's some math, but for the most part, I don't want to say it's optional, but you don't need to get heavy into the math because the software that's available today does a lot of the work for you. You just have to learn how to use software, a lot of it.
So where does it's so technical minded and a lot of equipment and minutia, where's the fun come in?
Well, that's the thing. It depends on what your goals are, of course. The fun, you know, my books, right on the first couple of pages, I talk about wanting to become a world-class imager. Now, there's millions of imagers out there, and then there's tens of thousands of astrophotographers probably.
But you've accomplished that because you've been published.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I've been able to gain the skills and knowledge up to where I can get my images up to a certain standard, and that's what. And people like to think that it's all magic or it's all in the person. It is up to a certain level, but also you can learn it. That's the big thing. It's a skills and techniques thing that you can learn out of a manual, out of my book, by practicing. It's like anything else. If you practice like playing the piano.
But you've been published in National Geographic.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
Sky and Telescope.
Oh, okay.
And in Astronomy magazine.
Okay, so you've had some national, international recognition, and exposure.
And people know me in the industry. I've got my name. Of course, Jerry Hubbell, the Hubbell name.
Yeah,
that's how I got my foot.
You get asked about that all the time.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
Well, is there a connection?
Yeah, there is.
Really?
Yep. All the Hubbell families. And Edwin Hubbell's name is spelled L-E on the end. My name is spelled E-L-L. But they're all from the same guy that came over from England in 1600s. We're all descended from that same fella that came over. And actually the Hubbell family has a big website, the Hubbell Family Historical Society. And we're a pretty close-knit family. It's a small family. The Hubbell name's not all that common. But all the Hubbells can be traced to that one guy. That's how they've done, all the genealogy have done that. So Edwin Hubbell, I guess the name split somewhere. I don't know how it split. I haven't read into that much, but the Hubbell family with the L-E spelling is separate from the Hubbell family with my name. So it goes back probably
same tree, same
root. It probably split about halfway through, probably in 1800 sometime.
Well, that's an interesting heritage, though.
1800, something like that. It split, but we're all in the same Hubbell family.
Well, getting back to looking at images in the sky, what is the Virginia sky from where we live here? I mean, do we have too much light pollution here to get really good views?
Actually, the lake, right here at the lake, is pretty nice. We're kind of away from Fredericksburg. You know, we're kind of in between Culpeper and Fredericksburg, and to the west, Orange. Orange is not a huge light area, but and then Northern Virginia, of course, is a huge area. But here at the lake, even further further south is better. But here at the lake, you can see the Milky Way on a nice clear night with the moon's not out. The moon always causes a problem because of the little bit of haze in the sky in the summertime, especially. But and believe it or not, the summertime is a better time to image than the wintertime. Even though people think the wintertime is the skies are so transparent and so crystal clear. But the problem you have is that it's called seeing. It's basically you've seen when you look at the sky, a star and it twinkles, right? That's because of the atmosphere. And that's called seeing, how well you can see the star, how focused it is, how tight the star is in the image. So the seeing causes the star to just jump around like this, right? And so in the summertime, what happens is you get this haze layer that stabilizes the atmosphere. The atmosphere quiets down with this haze. It's just real stable. And so the seeing is much better. So the stars aren't moving around like this. They're much tighter when you image them. Just think about looking at this star over like an hour period, right? You don't want it to move around like this because it gets to be a big blob. So in the summertime, the seeing is actually better than in the wintertime, even
So
though
that
the transparency.
twinkle, that's what you're talking about.
That's right, the twinkle,
little star.
Right, the twinkle goes away in the summertime, basically, because of the atmosphere.
Okay.
And that makes imaging better, even though the transparency is not as good. All the transparency does, if you've got poor transparency, is it just blocks some of the light. So that means the exposure has to be a little bit longer to compensate for that.
Well, we have to talk about, just for a few minutes, we've got to talk about the eclipse that's coming up in August.
Right, August 21st, the eclipse will happen, and I'm fortunate enough to be with a company that's all into astronomy, so I get to go to Casper, Wyoming, which is the center of the eclipse, basically the longest time for the eclipse.
Will you be shooting pictures there as well?
Yeah, there'll be thousands of people there where I'm going to be at, and we'll all be shooting pictures. But actually, I'm debating how much to do, because I just soon, this is my very first full, total eclipse. I'd just soon just sit and watch it as opposed to take photos, because there's going to be millions of photographs of it.
Sure.
Right, and I'll have access to photographs and people that are taking photographs right there. So I don't really know if I want to mess with that stuff. I would just want to enjoy the experience of my first total eclipse. I don't know how many more I'll see going forward. But, the first one I think I'd like to enjoy looking at it with my naked eye.
Well, it sounds like a man of accomplishment who's done all kinds of things in your life. Your children are accomplished, and you just...
I appreciate that, yes. My son, actually, my oldest son, Josh, he works at the power station. He's actually working on the same equipment I did when I started there almost 35 years ago, almost 40 years ago.
We think about guys like me who grew up on a ranch, so you inherit the ranch, and now from nuclear to nuclear.
Right, yeah, that's right. And my son-in-law has got his degree in nuclear physics also.
That's great. It's amazing.
And he's working on his doctorate right now.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking this time to visit with us and give us your story. And you're just one of our neighbors now, and now people will know you every time you see you in the food line or wherever.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah.
So I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and I've learned a lot today. And you've got my curiosity up. I may have to go pull your book up just to read some.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah. Yep.
There's all kinds of other things too. Don't forget the Rappahannock Astronomy Club.
That's right. We meet monthly. In fact,
you have
tonight.
A website.
Yep. It's raclub.org. It's raclub.org.
We're going to put that on the screen for you. So if you'd like to get in touch and get more information about it, you certainly can. In the meantime, we want to thank Jerry for being with us, and we also thank you for being with us on another version of Meet Your Neighbor right here on TV18 Life Around the Lake. This is Norm Allen with you, hoping you'll stick around because there's more good stories. I want to remind you also, you can drop us a line. If you have a neighbor or someone that you think has a story unique, we'd love to talk to them. So drop a line to normallen@outofthenorm.tv. Norm Allen at outofthenorm.tv. It's on the screen, and we'll get up with those, and they could be one of our shows. In the meantime, we'll see you again soon. Don't forget, this is all about Meet Your Neighbor, where the stories all about you.